Listening section directions. This test measures your ability to understand conversations and lectures in English. The listening section is divided into two separate timed parts. You will hear each conversation or lecture only one time. After each conversation or lecture, you will answer some questions on it. The questions typically ask about the main idea and supporting details. Some questions ask about a speaker's purpose or attitude. Answer the questions based on what is stated or implied by the speakers. You may take notes while you listen. You may use your notes to help you answer the questions. Notes will not be scored. In some questions, you will see this icon. This means that you will hear, but not see. Part of the question. Some of the questions have special directions. These directions appear in a gray box on the screen. Most questions are worth 1 point. If a question is worth more than 1 point, it will have special directions that indicate how many points you can receive. You must answer each question. After you answer, click on Next, then click on OK to confirm your answer and go on to the next question. After you click on OK, you cannot return to previous questions. In an actual test or during this practice test, a clock at the top of the screen will show you how much time is remaining. The clock will not count down while you are listening. The clock will count down only while you are answering questions. Click on Continue at any time to dismiss these directions.
Listen to a conversation between a student and an employee in the university work-study office.
Hi, I'm Paul Benson.
Paul Benson? Oh, that's a coincidence. The museum director sent a fax about you. Your 2-month review, your job review.
Oh, okay. I guess we can do that first.
All right. Let's see. Overall, you're doing a good job. I have to stress that. But the director did note that you invited friends over during working hours. Instead of greeting visitors and answering questions about the outdoor sculpture garden like you were supposed to, you talked with your friends.
It was only that one time, and they just showed up. I did not invite them. I straightened it out with the director.
Okay. But of course, you're still expected to behave professionally, do your job.
Yeah, I know. But actually, the fact is, I'd really like to work somewhere else. Maybe in a library or as a tutor somewhere. I was hoping you could help. I brought my updated resume.
Well, I don't know. You applied at the museum because you're a fine arts major, and you apparently made a very good impression on the museum director at your interview. You asked good questions about the sculptures and took notes, it says here. That's why they hired you and why they were willing to pay you. Museums normally use volunteers, you know.
I did enjoy learning about the sculptures.
Good. And your job is to share that information with the public.
Yeah, I know, but I'm always worried I'll give out wrong information. And if I can't answer a question, it's embarrassing, you know?
So the problem is the public nature of your work?
Yeah, I didn't realize how uncomfortable I'd feel doing this. I applied there because I'd like to be a museum curator someday.
Well, there are museum jobs that don't involve interacting with the public. You know, working behind the scenes. You could help set up exhibits, document new acquisitions, maybe work as an assistant to the curator's office. It wouldn't hurt to ask about other opportunities there.
Would you call and ask if I could, like you said, work with the curator? I've only met her a couple of times, but she...
You know, I think you should call. Tell the curator what you told me and ask if they could use any help.
What if she says no?
Well, you could still ask for information that might help you in the future, like what courses you should take and what kind of work experience is necessary to become a curator.
Yeah, that would definitely help. But then, would you be willing to help me find a job somewhere else?
I suppose if it came to that. But, you know, if you just educated yourself more about the sculpture garden, then you'd gain more confidence and maybe enjoy your current job more.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Why does the student visit the work-study office? What details did the director of the museum provide in his report? What worries the student the most about his work? Why does the woman advise the student to give the curator's office a call?
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
That's why they hired you and why they were willing to pay you. Museums normally use volunteers who...
By saying this, what does the woman mean to imply?
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
So, those are some of the common theories on bird migration. Now let's talk about homing. Homing is more than just the return flight home from migratory trips. Homing can take place at any time and from any location. It's the ability that some birds have of finding their way back to an exact location, regardless of their starting point, or how far away they are, or the time of year, and so on. You've all heard of homing pigeons, but there are lots of bird species that have highly refined homing skills. So maybe there's some evolutionary advantage. Why would birds be so good at this? Todd?
Well, baby birds stay in the nest while the parents go out and hunt for food. If the parents have to fly all over the place to find the food, they'd need to be able to find the nest again.
And once you'd found food, you'd want to get home quickly, wouldn't you? To feed your young? So you'd want the most direct path home. You wouldn't want to retrace whatever winding, meandering path you'd taken while you were searching for food. Being able to fly home directly is very efficient. The offspring get food faster, and their parents are home sooner to look out for them.
But it isn't just the offspring that benefit. The adult birds get back to a safe place sooner as well.
Right. Now, what about finding your way home after going south for the winter?
Well, it'd be nice if you could go back to a place you knew was okay. You know, one that's got water or food. Not too many predators. Some place where you might even still have a nest.
Good. Now, so far we've been talking about times when birds intentionally, or at least instinctively, leave home. But are there other reasons why a bird might find itself away from its nest?
Birds are vulnerable to really strong winds. Storms could blow them pretty far off course.
But finding your way back to your nest when you've been accidentally displaced is a little different from getting home after your annual migration to a warmer climate. So, do you think all those mechanisms we discussed that birds use when migrating apply to homing as well?
I think so. I mean, we talked about using the sun and the stars as navigational guides, and that would certainly be helpful for homing. And so would that ability to sense Earth's magnetic poles. The one in the studies you described about the internal magnetic compass birds have. Yeah, it should be the same.
Okay, so celestial bodies make good navigational aids. Anything else?
Well, for short distances, you could just memorize the area, use landmarks, like when my friend tells me to turn left after I see the post office to get to his house.
So, when birds are out searching for food, they can memorize landmarks. Mountains, rivers, who knows, maybe even the post office. Studies of gannets have shown that this is one way they navigate. Gannets are seabirds, so when they wind up in an unfamiliar location over land, they fly in outward spirals until they reach the coast. Then they use the coastline to find their way home. Of course, when we say that birds memorize their terrain, that may not be accurate. It's not always a good idea to use human analogies when trying to understand animal behavior, particularly when it comes to navigation, which we as a species are spectacularly bad at. I mean, even with maps, how often do we get lost? But with birds, they're actually over-engineered to be good at navigation. Just think about all those tools we've discussed. Celestial bodies, magnetic fields, landmarks. They've got a lot of sensory cues at their disposal. But how do they use them? For example, do birds use one navigational cue at a time? Like being guided by stars when the sky is clear and using magnetic fields when it's cloudy? Or do they use all these tools simultaneously, calibrating their location from multiple cues at the same time? Does the answer depend on the particular species? This is a really rich subject for research. In fact, let's talk about how you might go about designing some experiments to answer these questions. Keeping in mind, as I said, that your personal experiences won't be of much use as you try to come up with hypotheses to test.
What is the major topic of the lecturer's discussion? What are the 3 ways that homing behavior differs from bird migratory behavior, in the professor's opinion? The professor claims that when birds leave the nest to go food hunting, they frequently travel a different path back to the nest. What could be the cause of this behavior? Why did the professor mention a gannet study? What does the professor suggest the students might conduct bird navigation research experiments?
helpful for home.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
I think so. I mean, we talked about using the sun and the stars as navigational guides, and that would certainly be helpful for homing. And so would that ability to sense Earth's magnetic poles, the one in the studies you described about the internal magnetic compass birds have. Yeah, it should be the same.
Why does the student say this?
Yeah, it
Listen to part of a lecture in a business management class.
Before the break, David asked a question. When planning to start a business, or even just to compete more effectively, how important is it to analyze your competitors? Well, it's extremely important. In particular, you need to try to understand the assumptions that the competition makes before you develop your own business strategy. You see, every company makes assumptions. For example, they may believe they've got a terrific sales force when maybe they really don't. Or perhaps they think they've got the most innovative technology that's available when in fact there's something much more advanced out there. But how do you go about identifying a competitor's assumptions? Well, there are a number of factors you could decide to look at, but I'd like to focus on two really important ones that, in my opinion, are quite frequently ignored. Okay, you need to look at your competitor's past, its history. Companies are like people. They respond to events, current events, based on their past experience, whether positive or negative. For example, if a company's always been successful against its competitors, it may assume that it can't or won't ever lose those battles. Or, and this is a lot more common, if it's had a significant failure in its past, it may assume that it should never again try to engage in that particular activity. Clearly, a smart company learns from its mistakes. But companies aren't always good at recognizing when the business environment's changed. They don't always realize when past experience is no longer a good predictor of future performance. What else? Oh yeah. You also need to take an in-depth look at the leadership of the company. Even the biggest corporations are run by some group of individuals, and their personal experiences will play a large role in establishing the company's assumptions. Managers have histories too. They're influenced by past successes and failures just the way corporations are. Those personal histories shape their management assumptions. But it's not just the past experiences they've had at that particular company that influence managers. Some managers are hired from other companies rather than being promoted from within, and these outsiders bring new perspectives, which may not fit neatly with the company's existing assumptions. We see this a lot, especially if the new manager is not coming in with the experiences from the same business sector, but rather from one that operates with very different rules and assumptions, like moving from making automobiles to selling insurance. There's another reason to study the leadership. We expect top executives to be generalists. They have to be familiar with all aspects of their businesses, but the reality is that most of them have some specific area of expertise that influences their decision-making. For example, an executive with a financial background can't help viewing the world differently from a manager whose training's mostly in production. But you can make some pretty good guesses about how their backgrounds may influence their strategic assumptions. If the top person selects a management team where everyone has the same functional background, well, how hard's it going to be to determine that team's assumptions? Okay. Let's imagine that we've made a comprehensive list of a competitor's assumptions. Now we need to figure out if those assumptions are accurate. Companies treat their assumptions like facts, but they shouldn't. For example, Company A assumes it has highly loyal customers, so it doesn't worry when Company B starts selling similar products at lower prices. Since Company A is sure its customers are loyal, it decides not to lower its own prices. If its assumption's right, it won't lose any, or at least not many customers. But if its assumption's wrong, well, it could lose a lot of customers before it realizes its mistake. Assumptions can create blind spots, situations where the company can't see the whole business picture. With blind spots, a company misses the significance of events or reacts to them too slowly. And of course, identifying your competitors' blind spots can create terrific opportunities for you. And it doesn't really matter if the blind spot is based on arrogance, meaning the competition overestimates their own strength or underestimates yours, or whether that blind spot's something they're afraid of, where they shy away from making the same error all over again. In either case, if you move aggressively, it's likely that their response will be too little too late.
What is the main topic of the lecture? Which elements of a competitor's organization do strategic planners occasionally ignore, in the professor's opinion? What is the professor implying about managers who switch jobs to work for a different company? Why is the professor talking about a company's idea of its client's loyalty? Sometimes companies respond to competitors' strategic actions too slowly. What two explanations does the professor give for the slowness of these responses?
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
But you can make some pretty good guesses about how their backgrounds may influence their strategic assumptions. If the top person selects a management team where everyone has the same functional background, well, how hard's it going to be to determine that team's assumptions?
Why does the professor say this?
If the top person selects a management team where everyone has the same functional background, well, how hard's it going to be to determine that team's assumptions?
Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor Johnson?
Hi, how can I help you?
Well, my name's Matthew Burns. I signed up to take Film 200 next year.
Film 200. Now, where did I put that enrollment sheet? I wasn't expecting anyone to turn up quite this early, but they did send me the preliminary enrollment and found it. And your last name again is?
Burns, Matthew Burns.
Yes, Matthew. Okay, here you are. So what's...
Well, I'm a bit nervous about taking a film class for the first time, and I thought maybe I could get a head start over the summer. I already have an idea for a script, and I was wondering if you could give me a couple of tips.
A script?
Yeah, a script for a film.
But Film 200 is not a filmmaking class.
It's not?
We watch films, discuss them, analyze them, write about them. We do a lot of writing, but we don't write a film script. I guess you were thinking it was a filmmaking class.
Well, yeah.
No. 200 is film narrative. It deals with how films tell stories, what narrative techniques are used in film by analyzing a number of the classics.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. We'll talk about how narratives in film differ from stories in books. Did you read the class description?
I was so excited to enroll in a film class that I guess I didn't pay enough attention to what kind of film class it was. I thought I was registering for a filmmaking class. Sorry.
No problem. I mean, I can see how this kind of misunderstanding could happen. You know, there are a couple of filmmaking classes, if that's what interests you, but I don't teach them. You'd have to talk with Professor Webb. You know, actually, though, there's no reason why you couldn't take my class as well as a filmmaking class.
I wonder if I could swing that. I can't get out of my English, biology, and French classes. They're required. And I wanted my fourth class to be filmmaking.
Which English class are you registered for?
English composition. It's a required writing class. All students have to take it.
Oh, yes, English comp. You'll be writing a lot for that class. You know, this film class might fulfill your English requirement. You'd have to check with the English department. It's totally up to you, but... Let me ask you, do you watch a lot of movies?
Tons. Mostly modern ones.
Well, if you want to be a filmmaker, you need to be acquainted with the classics. Professor Webb could tell you more about what you should do. I recommend you talk to her. Then you can think about it over the summer. You can always add or drop a class in the fall.
Yeah, I think I'll do that. Thank you, Professor Johnson. You've been very helpful.
The man visits the professor. Why does he do this? What was it that the man wrongly estimated? What subjects will Professor Johnson be teaching his students? What is the connection between the English composition course and the cinema story course? What would the professor advise the man to find out at the English department?
Listen to part of a lecture in an astronomy class.
So your reading assignment focused on the technology, telescopes, and how they've changed astronomy. And there was a section on the Hooker telescope. So why was the Hooker telescope so important? Let's talk about that before we move on to some of the newer technologies. Now, back in the 1920s, the Hooker telescope was the most powerful telescope in the world. And through it, we could see for the first time, that the universe extends far, far beyond the Milky Way galaxy. We could see that there are multiple galaxies beyond it, and all these galaxies are moving away from one another. So, multiple galaxies moving away from each other led to the theory...
The Big Bang Theory?
Exactly. And that theory, that 15 billion years ago, when explosions started the expansion of the universe, well, at the time, that was a pretty revolutionary idea.
And the Hooker telescope was responsible for that?
Yes, because it allowed us to see that far. And being able to see that far led to, it led to the Big Bang Theory. But let's move on. The reading assignment discussed another tool for scanning the universe. Claudia, what can you tell me about interferometers?
Okay. An interferometer is a machine made of 2 or more conventional telescopes. I think the example they gave in the book was made from 6, and they're spread out. They're not right next to each other. And then the light, the starlight that those telescopes gather, travels through pipes to some computers, and then the computers put all the light together to make one image.
Okay, good. Although maybe that explanation is a bit simplistic. There may be 1,000 or so meters of pipe carrying the starlight from the telescopes to the computers, and then getting all those components to work together to synchronize so the light from all the different telescopes reaches the computers at exactly the same time. That's the challenge of working with interferometers. What else can you tell me? What's the advantage here, Paul?
All right. I think the idea isn't that it sees farther, but that the image you see is a lot sharper. There's more detail.
A lot more detail. The image we get is something like 50 times finer than what you get with a single mirror conventional telescope. So why is that important? Now think back a minute. A couple weeks ago we looked at Castor in the Gemini constellation. What do you remember about that?
Well, through our telescope here, a conventional telescope, Castor looked like a single star, but you told us that it wasn't. It's actually 6 stars orbiting, kind of dancing around each other. Oh, I get it.
And an interferometer would be able to see 6 separate stars?
Yes. Remember, single stars like our sun are the exception, not the rule. So more often than not, you have 2, 3, or more stars clustered around each other, like Castor. Not only that, but even a star's dimensions, a conventional telescope won't tell you. You can't determine a star's dimension because you can't tell exactly how far away it is. And there are other things as well. How do stars behave as they age? Why do they cluster together? What was our sun like in the past? Can we predict giant flares or periods of dimming? And interferometers will certainly help us find planets. And of course, the more planets you find, the greater the possibility of finding planets that may support life.
So, do you think interferometers will have the kind of impact the Hooker telescope had?
I doubt it. Remember, Big Bang was a really revolutionary theory. But then again, if an interferometer is used to locate a planet that supports life, well, that's another story altogether.
What is the main topic of the lecture? Why, in the professor's opinion, was the Hooker telescope significant? What benefit does an interferometer offer over a traditional telescope, in the professor's opinion? Why does the professor say the star Castor?
What does the professor imply when he says this?
And there are other things as well. How do stars behave as they age? Why do they cluster together? What was our sun like in the past? Can we predict giant flares or periods of dimming?
What does the professor imply when he says this?
But then again, if an interferometer is used to locate a planet that supports life, well, that's another story altogether.